Doris Leicher, it's a retired modern psychoanalyst who studied in Munich, Philadelphia, and New York. She continues to virtually teach Chinese candidates, and she presents with the International Psychohistorical Association. She's an active member of our group, the Intergenerational Transmission of Trauma and Parenting, as well as Faith, Psychology, and Social Justice. So, Doris, the stage is yours.
Thank you. This group has focused on the intergenerational transmission of trauma, which is an important subject, but it can be depressing. My presentation will focus on the larger theme of attachment, of which trauma transmission is a specific case. Hopefully, this will balance the negative with the positive aspects. For big background, evolution is an investment game with some limitations. For instance, as long as you reproduce, you have won, and some not self-evident traits. I will follow the models of major physical and mental illness, which appear to have a significant genetic component. The current theory is that mental illness operates similar to sickle cell anemia, which is a regressive trait. If you happen to get the double whammy from both parents, you are in for a shortened life of significant pain. But if you only inherit the trait from one parent, you have some protection against malaria, which may become a bigger advantage with climate change. Similarly, a genetic disposition for schizoid traits selects for lateral thinking, also known as creativity, while hypomania helps you to persist during really tough times. As example, Churchill saying, when going through hell, keep going. Apparently, the benefit of moderate doses for the many was worth the intense suffering for the poor souls at the extremes, so the genes persisted. And the principle I'm trying to illustrate is that evolution is really an ongoing balancing act between different factors to keep the mix versatile enough. And that's a feature that helps us go through crises. We know that all organisms try to transmit some knowledge about our world of survival to the next generation, and that initially this was done via genetic selection, which really doesn't involve learning, in that the environment selected random mutations of genes that were more effective in a given environment than others. And once I had looked at that, I started to wonder if this is a biological version of projective identification. You farm out a vitally necessary function until you can do it yourself. So the environment was given the function to select fitting genetic mutations. As we progressed and got more control, gradually adaptation occurred through learning, where the individual organism was changed their behavior. And it's interesting, just recently, I found that even bacteria can already learn from their mothers and grandmothers, as Parshall in 2024 illustrated. Learning is easiest in environments that are predictable and stable, and it can occur through simple observation. For instance, Wanda K. Moore discussed the effects of exposure to violence on children, and she found that the children were not the direct object of the violence, they just witnessed it, but if it hit an attachment figure, the effects were nearly as if it had happened to them. So attachment theory can be understood as a further intensification of social learning based on some softening of ego boundaries between the learner and their trusted attachment figure through mutual identification. It allows the learner to take on more risks with the attachment figure working as alter ego or safe haven. We know that learning in a state of relaxation tends to be more flexible and involve more details, similar to animals when they explore, and that means that the learning is more digested than in fear or rage, which is also a reaction to threat. In that case, the learning is more like a gulp. Both Safina and King talk about the importance of learning in cultures starting in animals even before the advent of primates. The teaching is mostly done by mothers who show a lot of attunement to the infants and gear their challenges to the young one's skills. It's interesting to see details of interactions between caregiver and child that lead to attachment. Funagi's description are particularly notable because he describes the caregiver as modeling trust. If we follow object relations, that projective identification is a major and normal learning process in infancy, that's where the model would apply. He talks about the caregiver seeing the baby, which is just trying to sort itself out physically, and therefore not quite intentional yet, as already intentional and responding to it as such. When I read it, I was really looking at the image that came to my mind was that the parent provides a mental trellis for the child to grow into. So one can say that to some extent the baby is a benevolent projection of the caregiver, a projection that functions like a trellis for the child to grow into. Of course, if the parent is unbalanced in some way, the trellis may not be so consistently benevolent, not because of conscious decisions by the parent, but simply because they can't do any better. Since this happens before the baby understands language, the message is communicated effectively in the rhythm and emotional tone of the caregiver. It appears that babies are highly sensitive to this type of communication, which has interesting applications in related areas. These channels are similar to the processing of art, and I suspect that it may have been one of the underlying reasons for the development of art, and may also be helping with language acquisition. Funagi talks about the mutual affective regulation in attachment as related to play, where alternative interpretations of affect and emotions can be tried on for size, and that helps children understand their own emotional reactions and develops the ability to understand some experiences as symbolic instead of simple reality. He points that out that this is characteristic of borderline characters that can do it. You have to have some learn some integration in order to be able to do it. And King also points out how attachment and mutual emotional regulation help cognitive growth, also by developing the concept of symbolism, that the children become aware that something can be symbols, which means that there's alternative interpretations. The importance of social connection is further validated that it even seems to work between different species. I had an African gray parrot for more than 20 years and was able to observe how he learned some words, spoken in the voice of whoever he learned them from. He duped me a few times with mom in my daughter's voice. He would correctly predict yes or no answers of my husband to my questions, and that is how we found out that it didn't matter what I asked, but how. Any tension in my voice resulted in a no. This nonverbal affective communication is an ubiquitous basis, and for many people, pets are more relaxing than their friends and spouses, and I think it's for that reason that all the Überbau, the superstructure of what else we do falls away. It fits this pattern that we have developed rituals to get closer to our animal-to-animal relationships under certain circumstances. In Drunk, Slingerland argues that we risk the undoubtedly negative consequences of alcohol intoxication because impaired predominantly the frontal cortex, which is the brain area best at deception, to go back to affect, to increase our bonds in preparation to risky undertakings where we had to trust each other. From this context, it should not be surprising that Solomon and Tapkin identify affective attunement and interplay as core characteristics in good relationships and a sign of trouble when mismatches occur, and especially if they persist. The affective attunement and communication show similarities with music. Themes spin off each other, possibly with some variety of intensity. For instance, the upset of a small child is mirrored in an attenuated version by the caregiver, and the upset is therewith contained. Safina describes widespread attachment patterns with various animal species, which can result in specific cultures, but they can also occur between species. Animals from different species can form friendships, in extreme, even predators with prey, and at times the prey is taking the initiative. For instance, I have a photo of a cat with a young squirrel that is snuggled up to it. And in the text, it said that it was the squirrel who would take the initiative and come in through the cat door to snuggle with the cat. Not what you would normally expect. That friendship can transcend species is a testament for its importance for psychological well-being, and the absence of opportunity to attach was shown by the severe disturbances in Harlow's monkeys who had no mothers or mother surrogates. The young monkeys also did not give up attachments when their surrogate mothers displayed aversive behaviors, just a blast of cold air, abrupt movements that dislodged the clinging infant, or spikes protruding from the mother, but became even more clinging, which was probably a reaction formation to the wish to leave. It's better to have a marginal attachment object than none at all. In people whose caregivers have unresolved trauma and thus behave in erratic ways, which would have been the closest approximation to Harlow's monster mothers, we see fearful and disorganized attachment features, but the attachment per se is not given up. This also illustrates the difference to intergenerational transmission of trauma, where an emotional pattern of the caregiver is faithfully copied by the infant. In this context, I recall the warning of my supervisor, Dr. Gerald Lucas, that hearing a report that a patient would respond to a doorbell by hiding in a closet does not necessarily mean that they're paranoid. They might have a paranoid parent who socialized them in a deviant manner. And it's only, if you really interact with the person, you can see what's the case. This deviant socialization is particularly relevant for our society, which is so weird, which is white, enlightened, industrialized, rich, and democratic. Ducleff in 2021 explains our outlier status compared to most other cultures, so does Haidt in The Righteous Mind, attributed first to the restriction of marriage within clans by the Catholic Church, which was the beginning of the drive to the nuclear family, which made parenting much harder because you didn't have as many altar parents. And the beginning of professional child rearing advice by medical men who were dealing with big orphanages in the 17th century, which also fostered normative strategies like schedules and things like that. An extreme of this attitude can be seen in the behaviorist warnings against mothers spoiling children with affection. That is the attunement of their needs, which prompted Harlow's experiments, which documented the biological need for attachment. Historically, in our culture, we can see a massive bias for normative child rearing. We're trying to rebalance from this massive scientific error. The struggle is ongoing, made worse because we are fighting ingrained economic structures. I mean, industrialization requires us to work with machines instead of other people. So and being indoctrinated to normative behavior fits that model better. And we also know, if you look at history, that people who were used to produce their things independently had immense trouble and felt enslaved by having to adapt to machines. King repeatedly makes the point that attachment and religions are associated with an increasingly complex desire to belong, evolving with our increasingly complex groups, where we had to learn the rules of the game, mostly from our mothers, but also others from the group. Belonging goes with adapting to the group's behavior and mood and participating in group activities. Haidt talks about the hive switch, which happens through muscular bonding, which, for instance, dancing in in a coordinated way, or marching, sometimes also music. And King defines religions not by their theologies, but by the rituals, which feed into the muscular bonding. She also movingly describes what we have lost during the evolution of religion when theology became more important, and the need to go back to the old focus on compassion, which was really the group cohesion and helping other people who were going through a rough spot. Being a firm part of a social group can provide protection under attack, but as discussed above, it also has numerous ego-supporting and enhancing qualities, allowing us to develop ourselves. Just like Fonagy describes the beginning of mental life in the baby, we can do it alone, just in interaction with each other. I want to talk a little bit more about Ducleff's description of Mayan child-rearing and modern psychoanalysis, because there are some interesting similarities which may provide a clue how to rebalance our outlier status. Mayan mothers start engaging their children very early on in helping with very small challenges. That socializes a child's impulse to imitate, which includes some competition with the parent, while training self-esteem in the awareness of their contribution. The child is given leeway to refuse or make mistakes, and new opportunities are offered. Modern psychoanalysis has a very wide definition of the patient cooperating.
4 minutes left.
Thank you. Which is focused on the patient's attempts to say what comes to their mind with no judgment about the content. Obstacles are investigated without judgment or punishment, and the patient is often enlisted to help the analyst to understand them. There's a hierarchical element in Mayan parenting, a discrepancy in standards. The child is allowed and also expected to be immature, but the caretaker is held to higher standards, which preclude retaliation and punishment. Often the child may not be protected from consequences of misbehavior, usually the end of a favored activity. In a similar way, also restricted to a symbolic level, patients are given more leeway to express aggression in modern psychoanalysis. Also, acting out has to be limited for safety reasons, and the analyst may have to tolerate some verbal abuse if that's the only way the patient can express anger until they have alternatives. It is very important for the analyst to understand the actual motivation for interventions to avoid disguised rationalizing of hostility. This distinction in maturity and matching standards is important to keep. It's important to keep the essentials of the relationship real, with only enough elements of pretense to allow for the necessary learning. It's again, it's another version of play, which is a primary vehicle for learning. And I'm not trying to recommend modern psychoanalysis for everyone, although it has good success with hard-to-reach patients. But I think it is very important to keep the priority of belonging in mind when we deal with other people to make our society more humane and sustainable again. That's it.